All right, great. So again, Maya Williams, she, her, Director of Research and Policy. I am joined by Stella Shong, who is the Research Associate here at CORE and who has really taken the lead on this phenomenal work that we're happy to present with you guys today. I see many CORE staff in the room. Thank you guys for joining. And all of the folks, thank you for taking the time today to be with us. We are really grateful to not just be able to do this work in this time, but to be able to share back the data, what we're hearing from community, and how that is um, really like shown in a lot of evidence-based research and publicly available data that we use. We're going to have 1 hour with you today, but please keep in mind that we will hold 10 minutes for Q&A at the end, but this doesn't have to be the last time that you hear from us, right? We'll share our contact, we'll share our emails, we'll share core socials, and we're always available to just talk with and be in community with all of you, whether you're a part of a city agency, whether you're a community member, working with the community organization. This doesn't have to be the last time that you'll hear from us about data, about these profiles, but this hour we would really just be sharing with you how we've gotten to this process, the purpose of the data profiles, and any other like questions that may come up from you in the interest of data. So we are going to share on our screen with a quick slides that we have for you, and I am passing it off to Stella.
Um, Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So again, my name is Stella Chan, the Research and Policy Associate here at CORE, and we're so excited to kick this off today. But before we get started, I just want to go over some community agreements just to make sure that we have a very fruitful and respectful conversation with each other. So first is make sure to make I statements so that we're all speaking from our own experience, not generalizing others as well. And second, to take space and make space. So if you know that you're a talker, make sure to make some room for others to speak. And if you're a listener, just recognize and remember that your voice is equally as important in this space. Third, ouch and oops. Just be mindful of how we're saying things or what comes out of the mouth and how that may be perceived by others. We don't want to make folks uncomfortable. And fourth, one thing to remember is that we don't have to agree. We can all have different perspectives, um, and we don't have to agree on everything to work toward the same goal. And lastly, one mic. Let's listen to each other respectfully, one person at a time, signaling to speak next or ask any questions, which we encourage folks, if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to drop it down directly in the chat box or raise your hand using the icon below. Do folks have anything to add? Just so that we are all in agreement of this to make this a comfortable space. Okay. If not, we can move on. So a little bit about an overview of how today's session is going to go. Firstly, we're going to go over a bit about CORE and what exactly we do for those who may be not familiar with us, as well as the community equity priorities and their associated data profiles that we came up with. Just as a context, CORE, we actually came up with 18 total CEPs, community equity priorities, but because of the limited time today for today's session, we're only going to go over 3 CEP data profiles, one from each fundamental value. And these will be CEP 2, 13, and 16. And of course, we're going to close out with just some overview of what's next for CORE and how folks on the call can be involved.
Great. Thank you for that, Stella. And again, so much gratitude for all of you who are joining. I'm seeing folks coming from various sectors of the city and community groups and community members. So we're so grateful. I just dropped the link in the chat, which is our homepage for community equity priorities. But just to start, I want to give you some background on CORE for those who may not be familiar with us in our work. We were birthed out of the November 2022 ballot proposals, and that work was led by the Racial Justice Commission. But New Yorkers truly overwhelmingly voted in for New York City to be prioritizing racial equity, for our city to be creating racial equity plans, having both an Office of Racial Equity, which is now known as the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, and the Commission on Racial Equity, which is us, CORE. We are an independent commission. centering community voices to hold government accountable for advancing racial equity. So we are the accountability body for this work. As an independent commission, we're led by 15 commissioners, and our work is truly laid out of the New York City Charter, specifically Chapter 78, where it really directs us through five mandates. The first being to identify and propose community equity priorities, which the work you'll hear on today. The second is to respond to the city's racial equity plans. Third, tracking and monitoring the city's progress towards the community equity priorities, but really the racial equity planning process at large. And then the fourth one is being able to take complaints from the public about city agencies that may be partaking in anything that's exacerbating racial inequities. And the fifth being able to fulfill requests that come from the speaker. Again, for the purpose of the work that we're sharing today, it really ties into the first three mandates, which is specifically identifying, proposing community equity priorities, and really helping to advance the racial equity planning process. So you'll hear us throughout this probably interchangeably say like community equity priorities or CEPs. Those are what community members view as most relevant to their well-being. They reflect the needs and priorities of local community members with a particular consideration of groups or categories of community members who have been historically underrepresented and underserved by government and its processes. So we've heard from communities, really defining marginalized groups, but you'll hear in our work, you'll see throughout the data profiles that this work is really tied to groups who we name as communities harmed by racism and social injustice. So those are the categories of folks that all of our work is referred to. That is who we engage with throughout New York City, but really making sure that we are hitting every community group throughout New York City. The community equity priorities really talk about a range of issue areas ranging from diversity and inclusion in city employment, disparities in city pay, language accessibility, access and transparency of data, which a lot of our focus will be on today, and ranging from also areas about non-biased artificial intelligence and accountability for city employees, whether that's police officers or social service workers. And that's just to name a few. You can see through our website many of the issue areas that the community equity priorities speak to, but we'll focus on three of those briefly throughout this session. So when we started our community engagement process in May of 2024, there were 16 draft community equity priorities published. Those draft priorities were developed from publicly available feedback, which was provided to local governments by way of town halls and other public sessions. When we went out to communities, we were ensured to speak to them across New York City, many different boroughs, hitting many different demographics. And we were able to speak to over 4,000 New Yorkers to be able to identify and finalize what is now 18 community equity priorities. These priorities are really the foundation of our work at this time, and it will inform the city's racial equity plans and actions. Our commissioners were able to use the feedback that we got from over 4,000 New Yorkers to be able to finalize these priorities. And it's really, this entire process is just a testament to how important community engagement is, how important it is to be inclusive with community members in policy decision making. We also want to uplift that the community equity priorities align with the fundamental values in the New York City Charter. So the New York City Charter not only shares the mandates that our work is directed about, but it has a preamble that lays out fundamental values that our city, whether it's city agencies or any administration, should really be looking to guide their work. So the first fundamental value is our government justly values all talents and contributions. The second, our government ensures the condition of thriving for every person. And then third, our government embraces vigilance, remedy, and reconstruction. So these fundamental values, you'll notice all of the community equity priorities are broken up by these values, but really CORE's work is always keeping these values in mind, whether we're talking to community members, whether we're talking to agencies, this is the forefront of our work. And in order for us to do the work directed of us by the charter, we ensure that we are really using community-driven and data-driven approaches. So The charter directs CORE to use publicly available data to be able to understand the past, current, and anticipated inequities presented in the CEP. So you'll hear us talk a lot today about the importance of data, and I'm sure that many of you in your work, your daily work, or just in your general lives understand, I hope, how important data is to this work. And we know many of you either collect or share data in your organizations or agencies' missions. So we'll just take this time now to just ask if anyone feels comfortable of dropping in the chat or coming off mute to really share with us how your agency or organization uses publicly available data in your everyday work. Anyone would like to share with us?
Well, at DP, we use income data from the state to inform our eligibility criteria for our lead service time program.
Great. And you said you were with what agency? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Department of Environmental Protection.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? All right. Well, it is our hope today, right, that this session and our work will really drive people to see the importance of data. We hope that the data profiles that we share with you can be an additional tool for you in your everyday work, that it can be shared across your networks in your commitment to hopefully advancing equity or in your work around racial and social justice. So we'll hear about groups of people who may not have access or quality resources to thrive. And we know that racial inequity is intersectional work. So this work for us being using data to do that is very important for us. So just keep that in mind as you hear from us today. And I'm going to pass it back to Stella.
Thank you, Maya. So for us, again, at CORE, we believe that data is the foundation to drive racial equity and social justice in New York City. And just as Maya had mentioned before, we use a community-focused and data-driven approach in our work to better understand the current, the past, and future inequities that impact New Yorkers that are harmed by racism and social injustice. And so, as part of our commitment to upholding data transparency and community voices, we created the Community Equity Priority CEP Data Profiles using, again, publicly available data to provide the public with an overview of the government's policies, programs, as well as funding gaps related to each CEP. And we're really hoping that the data profiles themselves can be a form of learning tool for community members, as well as policymakers, researchers, and any partner who is working toward the same mission of racial equity and social justice to understand the impacts and outcomes of communities harmed by racism, as well as understand the evidence-based context of why community members are sharing specific concerns that are relevant to their well-being, and learn about what services are available across the city, and how these services can be evaluated and enhanced, and how city budgets can be decided and affect how the services are rolled out for community members. And one thing we want to highlight is that we are well aware that there is a lot of information out there that speaks to these issues, but in general, there is still an inefficient scope of publicly available data that is broken down that really truly allows us to understand the root causes of these inequities and how government services and operations impact our diverse New York City population.
Thank you, Stella. So just to pick up, right, the profiles, again, recognizing that there's tons of data that speaks to these issues. You'll hear us say over and over again, it's, really publicized in a lot of our work that this is just a snapshot of the scope of the issues that each community equity priority brings up. We know that many of these issues that communities have told us is relevant to their well-being, they derive from structural racism, which is rooted many years ago, right? A lot of government operations, policies, budgets, and just the ways in which the system really works is rooted in that. So we strategically use what we deemed as most poignant to what we heard from communities, what they have shared with us. And again, being mindful that we're only using publicly available data. That is for the purpose of data transparency for community members, what is out there that's available for them to see, but also core being a space where we're able to bring those data points and that information to them that is accessible to them, and it's broken down in plain language, broken down in simple graphics, right? Each profile, the information and the data derived from agency reports, testimonies, hearings. We've used community organization reports, other one-pagers, and even data that comes from different media sources, so news articles, press release. And again, this is to ensure data transparency with communities. You'll also notice that in the profiles, we have a section that is named Community Voice. Again, CORE's mission to be centering community voices, our engagement work, where we're asking folks and we're on the ground with them, sharing what it is that they're experiencing. We wanted to be able to highlight those quotes in these profiles. During our engagement process in 2024, we asked community to not only tell us what is important to their well-being in an agreement and disagreement survey feedback response, but we also had an open text box that asked respondents to tell us what they think, what do they want to say to us, and if they actually have any additional thoughts about the priorities that were the draft priorities that were published. And we again see how important engagement is, because we heard from communities many ways in which we can add additional priorities that we should be considering. They gave us feedback on removing or changing sorts of things. So we thought it would be helpful to share some of that and share those responses in each profile relevant to each community equity priority. You can go to the next slide, right? So again, some things to consider within the scope of the community equity priority profiles. They're just snapshots, right? So we want to emphasize the limitations that this work presents for CORE, recognizing that community-driven and data-driven approaches does have limitations. CORE's data accessibility throughout the city has been a challenge for us. The need for data that we would need to have access to from agencies and from the city at large has been a challenge, in addition to the need for data disaggregation. Data disaggregation is key to doing equity work. It's key to understanding what our communities are experiencing. And for those who don't know, I'll just briefly share the data disaggregation definition that comes from the New York City Charter. And it's for us to collect data from or about multiple persons or households, analyzed and presented as separate categories by different race, gender, age, cultural background, neighborhood, language, income, and neighborhood. So collecting data in a way that is more detailed, which we know should be preferred over what is known as aggregated data, right? Disaggregated data broken down in these categories will allow us to see the inequities from communities. Historically, the absence and the continuance of data that is not disaggregated continues to allow policies and budgets that exacerbate structural racism. It doesn't tell us the multiple identities across our city. It doesn't tell us the exact needs of people who have those multiple identities. So in our work, in our engagement process, we have offered a voluntary demographic question where we give people the opportunity to select all that apply when it comes to these. But in addition to that, we ask people about their ancestry, right? Like that's something that is real. Folks come from different backgrounds, and that's all of these things should be considered when we're collecting data, when we're sharing data. And again, this is something that the charter has called for the city, all agencies to be doing. These are local laws that all agencies should be abiding by, but because that is not the case in this current moment, both data accessibility and data disaggregation has been a challenge for CORE and in the substance of this work. So you'll hear us, say that again, but keep that in mind as some limitations for the data that is presented.
Thank you, Maya. So now that we've gone over what the data profiles are, let's actually jump in and take a look at them. So, and again, for today, we're only going to go over 3, but we encourage you to explore on your own. But So to get to our data profiles, we will end up first on our lovely homepage where you can really find our mission and all the other work that we have been doing. But to get to data profiles, let's just click on Get Involved, as you can see on the tab here, and then select on the Dropbox, you can see data profiles. And this is where you can find our data profiles that we just mentioned. You'll see a little bit about the descriptions of what they are and our contact information. But when you scroll down, you can see that we have the 3 fundamental values listed, and those are where, if you click on each link, our CEP data profiles will be housed. So for today, we're going to go over 3, and the first one we're going to look at is CEP 2 from Fundamental Value 1. Our government justly values all talents and contributions. And when you click that link, you'll see here on the screen where all of the relevant CEPs for this fundamental value are housed, and you can see the individual data profiles. There's 6 of them. Again, we encourage you to explore on your own, but today we're going to look at CP2. So can folks actually see this on the screen? I'm really bad with text, so so do folks need to zoom in? Just let me know. Thumbs up.
I can see it okay.
Okay, let me maybe zoom in 1 or 2 more. Okay, does that look good to folks?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you can see on the screen, for CP2 data profile, it calls for the city to fund communities harmed by racism and injustice to shape and get updates on New York City government plans. And as we all know, it's really important for community engagement and voices to be reflected in the government decision-making process, especially since we know that our voices can really impact how the city plans policies and programs. But unfortunately, this is not the case for many New Yorkers. In fact, many are not sure of the ways that they can be part of this government decision-making process, especially community members who are already harmed by racism and social injustice and have historically been excluded from this process. So through our series of community engagement conversations with the 4,000 New Yorkers from last year, we can folks see it? Okay. We heard directly from community members that they want to actively be part of the government decision-making process. And what does that actually look like? So one, community members expressed that they want to be included in all phases of the process. And that means before, during, and after policymaking. And not just when the government has already decided certain rules and laws and already have these in place. And 2, they want to be included in the budget decision-making process as well, making sure that the city is spending money on programs and policies that support and address their community needs. And as you can see on the screen above, to the right, there's a community voice here that demonstrates what community members have been saying, that they want to be part of this process. They do not want to be included again when policies and rules are already in place and set. In fact, they want to be part of the process. They want to suggest and check off the boxes when on the ballot or paper, not just when things have already been predetermined by the government. And to be honest, I myself, I wasn't aware of the ways that I could be part of this process as well until I started at CORE, which is honestly not too long ago. And it was really through this research process that I learned of the 2 major ways that community members, including you and myself, can be part of this process, other than obviously the major elections that we know of. So as you can see on the screen, we highlighted that on this data profile which is through the participation of community boards. I'll shorten that for our presentation, calling them CBs, and as well as through the 30-day rulemaking process that the city has. So starting from CBs, I'm sure folks are more familiar with this way of participating in government decision-making process. CBs are really the first step for community members to share their voices on local policy, budgets, and complaints. And just for fun fact, we have a total of 59 across the city in each borough. And by law, CBs are mandated to provide feedback to the public about budgets, priorities, respond to community complaints, share information, hold public hearings. So really they do a lot. But actually CBs are often not able to meet these requirements because of limited financial resources. And from our research, we know that some CBs receive less funding compared to others. And in fact, when we looked into the publicly available data on the city budget expenses, which is actually housed on Open Data NYC, we found that the CBs in Bronx, they received the least funding compared to the CBs in the other 4 boroughs, which is actually really concerning to us because using a racial equity lens, we know that Bronx is the most underserved borough with the highest poverty rates and the worst health outcomes. And so looking at this data, what does that tell us? That really tells us that the CBs in Bronx need increased funding from the city, and also that CBs in general need to have funding based on the assessment of community needs and assets to ensure that community member voices are actively included, that CBs are properly operating. And so on the screen, I'm not sure if folks can see, but there's the graph that shows the funding by borough for CBs by boroughs. And you can see Bronx is the blue on the very bottom. And again, it receives the least funding compared to the other boroughs. And while this number, 327,000 seems like a large number, and it's still a lot of money. We need to keep in mind that this funding includes expenses for like basic operations, including like things like rent, which we know is disproportionately expensive in the city. So really, if you look at the budget for all the CBs in the 5 boroughs, it's really not enough to serve the community members. And you can really tell that if you compare that to the citywide budget, which is 112.4 billion. None of the budgets for the community boards by borough kind of compare to that. And of course, community boards have other issues that not highlighted here, but we have highlighted in our previous round of data profiles, which we encourage folks to look at as well to have a comprehensive understanding of CBs, is that there is a lack of representation of community members. But again, even despite these limitations in representation and funding, CBs again are the first step for community members to be involved in the government decision-making process. But again, it is only effective when there is adequate funding support. And then the other process I want to highlight on as well on the data profile is the city's 30-day rulemaking process. Are folks even aware of this process? Because I was not sure until I did this research again. So as you can see, for a rule to be implemented by the city, it must by law go through these 9 steps that you can see on the screen. So these 9 boxes, these are the 9 steps. And yes, that's a lot of steps. But where exactly do community members kind of play a role in this? And you can see on the screen that it is in steps 4, 5, 6, and 7. So these orange boxes here, that's where community members can be involved. That's where community members, they can publicly review and comment on the rule by submitting a verbal or written testimony. And at first glance, it really does seem like community members are fairly included in this process, being able to have their voices heard before the rule is either approved and enacted or rejected. But when you look at a closer look, just looking at step 1, which says city agency drafts a new rule, we can actually see the exact issue that was raised by community members. That is, community members are not involved when there's a drafting of a new rule. So community members are not consulted when city agencies come up with this new rule, which brings the question, why exactly aren't city agencies, working with community members to come up with the rule in the first place? And that supports community members call through the CEPs to be part of the entire process. And moreover, there's no guarantee that city agencies will come back to community members once they receive all the public comments and testimonies. They're not obligated to get back to community members. So truly there are a lot of gaps in terms of where community members can be part of this entire process. So again, this data profile really, there's two main takeaways that we want folks to take away from this is the fact that community members want to be engaged in the government decision-making process. And as you can see, there are ways, but there are clearly gaps that need to be improved and addressed by the city so that more New Yorkers can be part of this process at all phases. So that is CEP2 data profile. And in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next one, which is CEP 13. So we're going to X out here. I hope folks are still seeing this screen because I can't see. I
Yeah,
don't
we
really
can
know.
see. Thank you, Stella.
Awesome. And let me know if I'm going too fast as well. So again, fundamental value 1, the data profiles. Let's go back to the landing page and then scroll down. And here's our fundamental value 2, which is government. Our government ensures the condition of thriving for every person. So for this fundamental value 2, we have a total of 7 CEPs that you can see. And I'm not sure if folks have noticed, but we kind of color coordinated the fundamental values too. So before it was green and orange, now we are updating our palette to blue and orange. So scrolling down, we're going to look at CEP 13. Oh, and sorry, I forgot to mention that fundamental value 2 really focuses on ensuring the condition of thriving for all New Yorkers, which really calls for economic security and support from the government to achieve this economic security. And so let me scroll down again, clicking on that, CEP 13. And folks see it. I'm going to zoom in a little more. Okay, perfect, cool. So again, as we had mentioned multiple times that community members drive coursework. And in fact, CEP 13 was not part of the original 16 CEPs. It was actually created and added onto the list to reflect the community members' desire for the city to increase access to and lower the rising costs for basic needs, which include things that community members have mentioned specifically like quality food, transportation, medical costs, housing. And in conversations with community members, we heard that they need access to not just quality food, but just food in general, which honestly is a real concern for everyone. I mean, look at the prices of eggs. Like I think I saw $17 for a dozen of eggs, which is ridiculous when that money could go to other expenses like rent, which we also have heard from community members about worrying about the rising rent in New York City. We even heard from a community member about not being able to go to a job interview because they can't afford the cost of the subway, which is I think it's $2.90, probably going to increase soon, or is already increasing as we speak. And so again, these are very real concerns about the cost of living in New York City, which again does not just affect the community members that we have heard from, but also you and I on the call, because we all live in New York City, I think. And yeah, so we actually have research from like the Urban Institute on the true cost of economic security that actually found that the majority of Americans are economically insecure. And what does that mean? That means that folks are just making enough to get through, paying for their basic needs, but not able to save and thrive for the future. And this is actually the case for many New Yorkers, with many simply not being able to save. And of course, this situation is worse for those who are already underserved and again harmed by racism and social injustice, especially in this current political climate and economic state. And so it's actually really crucial for New York City to obviously support New Yorkers to be able to thrive and live comfortably in New York City, as well as to have a measure of the true cost of living, so that the city can use that measure to determine which city programs and policies to fund and to support community members. And you can see that call is reflected in the community voice on this data profile, where a community member from Brooklyn asked for the cost of living so that folks can have the ability to live and thrive. And again, this is also outlined in the charter for the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice to release. So we're going to be hearing from that soon as well. And without this measure of the true cost of living in New York City, it's quite difficult to achieve economic security and equity, which is crucial to achieving racial equity as well. But even without this true measure of this true cost of living in New York City, one thing for sure that I'm sure everyone on the call agrees on is that just living in New York City is extremely expensive. And it's tough to, you know, get by. And so for this data profile, I want to highlight some of the few data points that really illustrate how the high cost of living in New York City is causing community members to struggle to afford things like housing, food, health, and transportation. So starting from health, as you can see on the screen, is I think folks can see it. Healthcare, as we all know, is, well, I believe, is a human right. And yet, even in 2019, as you can see on the data profile, more than 76% of 980 surveyed New Yorkers reported being worried about affording healthcare. And that was 6 years ago, if I have done my math correctly. And so that tells us, with what's happening in our current climate, with the changes in national health policy, there community concerns in terms of medical costs will only exacerbate. And it's also really unclear how the city is going to address these medical costs, even though we have the Office of Healthcare Accountability. So in terms of how will the city maintain or lower medical costs so that folks can have access to healthcare services. And the other concern for many community members, again, is food. Food, as we know, is also a human right. It's necessary for survival, but data shows that in New York City, there is an alarming 1.3 million New Yorkers who are food insecure. So that means they lack regular access to healthy, nutritious, quality food. And I also want to highlight that food insecurity in New York City is not a new issue. It's something that has just worsened since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, where folks have increasingly been relying on SNAP as well as food pantries. And just another fun fact, I don't want to scare folks, but the expense of grocery is expected to increase by 30% soon. And then housing is also a major concern for community members as well. So as folks can see here, and it's not surprising that we found data that 100% supports community members' concern over housing costs, especially when it comes to rent costs. So in 2023, the citywide median monthly rent was actually $3,500. And in the same year, 50% of New Yorkers' income went to paying rent. What does that mean? That means there was no room for folks to save for the future. And again, we can only imagine that the cost will increase in the future. And lastly, as you can see on this data profile, we also highlighted the cost of transportation. I think that's something that we commonly overlook, but public transportation is a must for New Yorkers to get to work and places and home and other places. But research and recent data shows in 2023, 1 out of 5 New Yorkers actually struggled to pay the subway and bus fares. And that is 20% of the New York City population. And while the city has the Fair Fares program that provides assistance to low-income community members for transportation, I want to note that many are still ineligible to be part of this program because the current income eligibility is at 120% poverty level, which I also want to note that poverty level is not an accurate measure of the economic circumstances that folks are going through. And so scrolling back up, so this was data profile 13. And one thing to note is that we are just limited to this one pager on the cost of living in New York City, but honestly, we could have filled up probably 10 pages of this because it's expensive to live in New York City in general for everything. And we didn't even get into things like childcare, utilities, education costs. And honestly, that would also require us to get back to community members to see if that resonates with that's their need And if so, we will update the CEP statement that you see here on above. And so, yeah, so from this data profile, we again can see that New Yorkers are really struggling to pay for basic expenses and to save and thrive for the future. And from this, I'm not sure if folks got the main message, which is clearly the city needs to step up to implement policies and programs to support community members. I know that was a lot, and I want to let Maya speak as well. So we're going to hop on to our last CP from Fundamental Value 3. And again, I'm going pretty fast, so bear with me.
Thank you, Stella. I know we're sharing a lot of information. We really do hope that just the accessibility that you have for this, you can spend more time with it. Again, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or would like to either point us to the direction of some additional data or just be in conversation about this. So I'm going to briefly go over the last profile that we're going to review today, and it falls under Fundamental Value 3, which is our government embraces vigilance, remedy, and reconstruction. The five community equity priorities that fall under this value really focus on changing the systems within our city, right? It causes us to look at how it causes the city to really address and dismantle deeply rooted systemic injustice in our city's infrastructure. And the specific priority that we're going to go over today really focuses on accountability. This is community equity priority number 16. This priority calls for New York City to ensure that all city employees and their agencies, including the police and social service providers, are held accountable for any harm and abuse of power. So again, this is what communities have told us is a concern for them. It's a priority. We've heard many things about the ways in which community members are treated by government agencies, whether that's through like direct services and the direct harm that they face, which really adds to community members' distrust in government. So you'll see here on the right that a community member has told us they did choose to not identify themselves. So you'll see here that we wrote it as anonymous, but that person mentioned to us that agencies and systems and institutions should be held accountable for harm and their contributions to ways in which racial disparities have been perpetuated and even exacerbated. So we're all aware that our city has several accountability bodies, whether they're named as oversight bodies, whether they're named as independent commissions like CORE, but they are responsible for the oversight of agencies and agency staff. So we looked through tons of reports and budgets of said accountability bodies and the agencies that they're charged with overseeing. And some data points that we were compelled to highlight was really information starting with the Department of Investigation. And the Department of Investigation is responsible for conducting investigations and issuing recommendations to be able to prevent city employees or elected officials from engaging in misconduct and corruption. However, from 2023 to 2024, the New York City Department of Investigation received over 10,000 complaints, with only 390 of them being referred for criminal prosecution. There's tons of things happening across our city. We learned that although DOI receives these complaints and their job is to recommend actions to said agency that complaint falls under, the disciplinary still lies with the agency. The agency can reject those recommendations. So that restricted disciplinary power really limits the ability of the Department of Investigation to be able to truly hold the government accountable to the public. This is something that many of us are, whether you're aware of or not, but to see the numbers of the complaints, to see how many investigations are still, like pending, and just the fact that the public or even other agency staff has accessibility to something like this, but the agency is not able to fulfill what they're really laid out to do is an issue, and community members are very concerned about it. We also chose to highlight the work of the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is an independent agency that is charged with investigating public complaints of the New York City Police Department, their misconduct, but they too face similar barriers as CORE does when it comes to being an independent commission, as the Department of Investigation faces, but particularly the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Recent data revealed from 2024 revealed that they received over 5,000 complaints from the public about police officers' misconduct, which included allegations that claimed excessive force. We are all not, or should I say, we're all very knowledgeable that many of the victims who are harmed or may have proposed allegations against the New York City Police Department are persons of color, are folks who are underserved and underrepresented in government, right? So it's no surprise that of those complaints, not many of them led to officers being found guilty and for particular recommendations, right? This speaks to the disciplinary power for an independent agency like CCRB, where folks are coming to them and experiencing their impacts from their relationships with government, from their relationships with the department. And then you see here the numbers. There were 890 cases dismissed as no disciplinary action because a lot of this work goes back to what we're sharing. The disciplinary power doesn't, that authority does not lie specifically with CCRB. So CCRB will be able to be more strengthened in holding law enforcement accountable if the agency had final disciplinary authority instead of the New York Police Department's police commissioner, right? That commissioner actually has discretion over the outcomes of these allegations. In addition to, we spoke about this before, the adequate funding for independent agencies like this. Think about a oversight body who is charged with looking at misconduct of such a large agency like the police department. They would need adequate funding that is at least like a minimum of 1% of NYPD's budget to be truly able to do this work. And that also speaks to like exemptions, right? Like a lot of the accessibility to data that this body would need to be able to hold police officers accountable, in addition to access to body-worn camera footage, which you see here. We have tons of data points that speaks to that. But for the sake of time, just really want to uplift that this brings us back to our city agencies having accessibility to data to be able to do their work. And then data being the foundation to drive equity across our city. So this is where we'll stop with sharing specific profiles. We know that we have fed you tons of data, and again, hope that you take advantage of going on our site, reading further, but we just really want to reiterate that the profiles are really a start for CORE. We chose to just only speak about 3 today. There's 18 that you can find on the website. We tried our best to just present as much data as possible, given the idea that there are gaps in some of the data, but still we hope that you, community members, policymakers, and researchers really can use this work to advance equity, use this work to be able to build relationships with folks to get a better understanding of what it is that our community members are experiencing. We took up a lot of time, but would like to open up for a brief discussion with one, how will you or your organization or agency use the data profiles in your work? Hopefully you will. But anyone want to come off mute or drop a response in the chat? Was it like too much data where you're like, hold on, I need to download this? Lauren, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation. I was just going to say, like, in terms of my work and agencies' work, but more generally, it's great to see all of the sources on each of the profiles. So just like having that in mind in terms of finding publicly available data is sometimes a difficult step. So having these trusted sources is something that's really helpful.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and it's so hard to like find things, right? Like talking about the accessibility. So, again, hopefully you can even take advantage of those links to do your own work as well. Anyone else? Are there any questions about our process, about the data profiles, about anything that we shared, or just in general, some feedback? Sarita.
Hi, yes. Also, echoing gratitude for the work that your office has done with these data profiles. It's really quite comprehensive and nice to see. So just wondering about the process of choosing these one pagers and the format and the data that you chose to lift up out of the multitude of data points that you probably could have. I'm thinking about the data points on the economy or economy related topics and why not more about child care, for instance. Can you just share a little bit about the process of your thinking regarding those choices?
Yeah, sure. So again, like any of the information, it derives from the community equity priority. So the community equity priority comes out of what we heard from communities. So thinking about what they shared in an open text box or what they've told us is actually important to them at this time. So we made sure to use that as a foundation of what like whatever they shared with us that they're experiencing, looking for data that speaks to specifically that experience. So that's why certain things were shared. We also did this previously where at that time using information that came out of like town halls and publicly available data from that was given to government agencies before CORE like really got on the ground. Um, we were able to just reassure from communities what is blaring and what is most important to them and made sure that the data that we shared alludes to what they spoke to us about. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
partially, but thank you for sharing that.
And again, we hope to like continue this work, like bringing out research projects that speak to this that allow us to go more in depth. But really wanted to have this as a tool, as a starting point, as we continue our engagement. But we're definitely going to be continuing this work outside of just one pagers, moving forward. Adrian?
Hi, thank you so much for sharing this presentation. Um, I thought this was really interesting. And particularly I wanted to like talk about I think it was priority 13. Um, while you were talking, Stella, you had mentioned what had struck out to me, you had mentioned like the discrepancy between funding across the boroughs, right? Particularly the Bronx. And I was wondering if you had like that same type of framework when you were thinking about 13, when we were talking about economic insecurity and housing costs. So like I can imagine something that affects all New Yorkers, like based on that infographic you had, right? Housing costs and medical costs. But did you see anything that like maybe was a particular concern for certain boroughs, right? That something may have been a bigger priority for the Bronx versus Queens. And then also when like thinking about continuing with this data um, and connecting to officials like say, oh, we created this infographic, maybe we want to share that with Bronx council members or Queens council members or something like that, like this tailored thing. And then I guess my last question is like this survey that you collected. I think it was a great idea to get people input, right? And the fact that it added to including additional priorities. Is it available for people to use?
So I can take the second question first.
Okay.
We're gonna definitely, before we close out, share with you about the next engagement. We also have like the slides of the findings from that feedback engagement process available on the website where we read back a lot of the analysis and the findings from the 4,000 New Yorkers. But then to your question on like the disparities within the boroughs, Stella, do you want to share about our next work that's coming up by borough?
Yeah, so we're actually going to have another set of data profiles by borough based on what we've heard from community members, and that breaks down what community members have voiced in terms of their level of agreement with the CEP. But in terms of your specific questions about any similar data that shows disparities in terms of healthcare costs as well as transportation and all the others. To be frank, there wasn't a lot of like available data on healthcare costs. A lot of that is actually on the state level. And that's definitely something that the city can be doing better. But again, that kind of is unclear, like who is actually currently doing that. Everyone's doing things in like silos if they're collecting the data on this. And then in terms of food costs, again, we're limited by what's available in that's available on open data in NYC. But I'm not sure if we caught that on the data profile, but we did see from prior data that there are some I think it was like Bronx community members actually are the ones who are receiving SNAP benefits out of all across the 5 boroughs. So just by looking at that, we can see that there are certain pockets of community members who are struggling a little bit more than others. But again, we as a team struggled a lot with finding data to show all these disparities. And I think that's something to recognize that even though we can't find like racial ethnic data points specifically, we tried our best to find other data points broken down by other demographic factors just to really highlight that, racial equity is an intersectional issue. And to tackle this, we can look at other pockets of disparities as well. And then, does that answer your question, Adrienne?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I will also add that there is another community equity priority that speaks to things like housing ownership and things like that. And that's CEP number 15. That profile does break down the disparities by borough as well. So just to add to, like the inequities across. But our data in general from our first engagement, as well as the engagement that we're actually launching again today, which is exciting news. We will be sharing our data with New York City Open Data. Core is extremely new. Extremely new. So we just ask that, as we do this work, community continues to be patient with us as we get all of our systems up and running. But we definitely, in the spirit of data transparency, will be making sure that that data is on open data and shareable for you all.
And I know we're running out of time, but I want to just point out that this round of data profiles really focus a little bit more on the funding from the city that relates to CEPs and the gaps. So really to have for folks on the line who really want to understand more of the context for each CEP, to really get a better understanding, we really encourage folks to look at this round's data profile as well as the last round data profiles, because if you add them up together, then those are like 2 full pages of information that really provides more context. So yeah, we recognize that there are just gaps in this one pager. And we would definitely write more if we could, but but again, we want to reach community members in a simple way where things can be easily digested and just disseminated as well. So. Okay, so I think we've reached the end of our presentation. If you have any additional questions, feel free to drop them, unmute yourself. But here's a bit of our contact information, Maya's email as well as my email. So if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to email us directly at the emails listed up right in our screen up here, or in general about Core's work. And you can email our general core email, askcore@core.nyc.gov. And we would love to hear from you, ways that we can improve and collaborate and work toward the same goal. I think we have another question.
Yeah, sorry. It was just about what you mentioned just now about the other round of CEP data profiles. Where can we find those?
I will drop the link right now. Thank you. Um,
Thanks.
they too are on our website, and here's the link. But before folks go, as I'm doing that, really just want to share with you that, being in community with folks is very important to us. Our second engagement begins today. That launch is happening where we're going back out into communities, looking to hear from them. What do they need in order to thrive? We really this round want to be able to measure the level of urgency that community members feel for each of the priorities to be able to, one, continue this work, but also learn more so that our data becomes more expansive, that we're able to share that back out to city agencies. So if you or any of your organizations, your networks would like to have core at any of your meetings to talk on this work, we are open to that. The survey that is launching again today, you guys are actually the first folks that we're sharing it with. So that is exciting. You please feel free to share it and to take it and share with us about, like you as a New Yorker, whether you're working with the city agency or not, we still, like want to hear from you. You are just as important in this work to us. And then here are our socials. If you want to continue to follow our work, sign up for our newsletter each month. We are sharing the work that we're doing, whether that's coming from our commissioners, whether that's coming from community. But we really want to keep doing this equity work no matter what, and doing it with all of you who also prioritize this work. So thank you for being with us. Please reach out if you have any questions, and we truly appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much again for attending, and it gives us so much encouragement to continue our work, seeing folks who align with the passion to achieving racial equity. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Thank you.